Welcome back, horror lovers. We hope you're ready for today's terrifying story. And if you decide to watch it alone and with the lights off, you'll surely end up wary of literally everything around you. So do so at your own risk. Juliet saw on TV a commercial where a ventriloquist showed up. Ventriloquists are people who have the ability to speak while almost not moving their lips, giving the impression that their words are coming from another source, like a special doll known as a dummy. At first, Juliet thought that the dummy was the one actually talking, but her father told her that it was all an illusion. And when he explained to his daughter how ventriloquism worked, Juliet was fascinated. She was so enthralled that afterwards she would implore her parents day and night to please buy her a dummy so she could practice ventriloquism. However, since her parents were not happy with that idea at all, and because ventriloquist dummies are so expensive, they decided to just buy her a normal doll. And to keep Juliet entertained, they told her that if she built a good relationship with the doll, it would move its lips on its own when Juliet talked. Innocent, Juliet completely believed her parents and was so hopeful that she set herself the goal of becoming her doll's best friend until it finally moved its lips. Juliet would then spend all day with her new partner, which wasn't just a mere toy for her anymore. She would drink hot chocolate with her, talk to her for hours about whatever happened at school, and would even tell her stories. Her parents had never seen their daughter so happy. However, Juliet became aloof towards her parents and also became overprotective of her doll. If they asked her to do anything, she would first consult the doll before doing it. She would then imagine an answer and act accordingly. Then one day, Juliet suddenly rushed downstairs, crying of happiness. She explained to her parents that the doll had finally moved its lips, and not only to imitate her, but also to speak. They thought Juliet had gone crazy. And since she had been acting so strange for so long, and they missed so much how Juliet was before having the doll, they decided to grab Juliet's dear friend and throw it in the garbage. They were very worried. So much so that they thought having Juliet see a psychiatrist would be the best option. However, therapy did nothing. Little Juliet stopped speaking, and when she was awake, the only thing she did was cry. Feeling guilty, her father went out to look for the doll, praying that he might be able to find it somewhere, or he would have to buy another doll of the same type. And when the father was about to lose all hope, he saw how a girl was carrying a doll exactly like his daughter's. And he didn't know why, but he was completely sure that that was Juliet's doll, the exact same one he threw in the garbage. He approached the girl and offered to buy it from her. And at first she hesitated, but the girl eventually accepted. He then brought the doll home and gave it to her daughter, who received it with a huge smile on her face. He saw how Juliet's expression changed completely. She started speaking again and thanked her father for bringing the doll back. And then, a couple of weeks later, the parents appeared on TV. Juliet had murdered them, claiming that the doll had instructed her to kill them. The legend says that many years ago, in a town, lived a mother with her 3 children. Misfortune had knocked on their door when the father of the family died in an accident, leaving the wife alone with the children. After a while, the woman found a new partner and remarried. Again, there were 5 at home, but unfortunately this union was critical for the children because their stepfather was violent towards them. He mistreated them secretly from their mother for no reason and imposed severe punishments such as taking away their food, denying them water, or locking them in the basement. Although his behavior was mean and abusive towards all the little ones, much of his anger was vented on the eldest daughter, who received the most beatings and scoldings. On one of those occasions, the man was blinded by his fury and violently threw the girl down the stairs, causing her death on the spot. Frightened by the possible consequences, the stepfather fled, and the mother, with her 2 little ones, decided to leave home to avoid remembering every day the death of the minor on those stairs. The house was put up for rent, and it went through several tenants, but all of them were short-lived. They claimed to hear a child's voice asking for help. The house became a scene of terror. Screams and wailing could be heard, and the doors opened and closed by themselves. The spirit even came to knock on the door to ask for water. The most disturbing thing was that when someone passed by on the stairs, he could feel their presence. It was as if the girl was placed in that place where she had met her death. It isn't known if she was taking care of the other tenants, trying not to let them fall down the stairs, or if she was waiting for the right moment to push them and make them suffer the same fate. Some claimed to see her, others only heard her. Although they were unaware of their intentions, for some people, these paranormal events were enough to scare them for life. Although no other person died while the house was inhabited, rumors made it so that no one else wanted to live there. It is said that the house remains abandoned in the middle of the field, and that some nights, hikers who passed by came to see the ghost of a girl leaning out of the window, sometimes asking for help, other times just watching them in silence. If you know the area and risk going in, never go near the stairs. Better not to know the intentions of this spirit. Rocío had been invited to a Valentine's Day party at the new cabin of her best friend. However, her parents didn't allow her to go because the cabin was still under construction and it was located high in a mountain, making the place dangerous to be in. Since she didn't want to be alone on February 14th, she convinced her parents to let her boyfriend spend the day at her house. In her head, it sounded like a good plan, and she also felt excited about introducing her boyfriend to her parents. However, when Valentine's Day came, Rocío waited for 2 hours, but her boyfriend was nowhere to be found. That is, until her friends called her to tell her that he was actually at the cabin with another girl. Those words hurt Rocío so much that she immediately devised a plan to escape. Tricking her parents was easy. She told them that one of her friends was hospitalized and she had to go see her. They knew their daughter never lied, so they immediately believed her and let her go. Rocío then took a taxi to the cabin and soon after found her boyfriend. And just like her friend said, he was with another girl. Rocío's screams were so loud that everyone at the party stopped what they were doing to hear her. A few minutes later, Rocío's boyfriend convinced her to get in his car. They left together, arguing while he was driving until he had to take a sharp curve and ended up crashing with another car. He was driving so fast that Rocío was shot out of the car, breaking through the windshield. The other driver and Rocío's boyfriend got off their cars. Rocío was laying on the ground at the roadside, and when they approached her, they verified that she was not breathing. Both the other driver and the boyfriend were drunk, and fearing being convicted for femicide, threw her body to the mountainside. Rocío couldn't move due to the body trauma and also broke many bones during her fall, but she was still alive. She spent 3 long days bleeding out slowly without anybody seeing her to help her. Days later, workmen heading to the mountain cabin found her dead body when they saw something strange at the bottom of the mountain during their smoke break. And her dress was no longer white. It was completely red due to all the bleeding. No evidence of a deliberate femicide was ever found, so the case was archived. The boyfriend and those who went to the party remained silent. And eventually, the police finally gave up on the case, arguing it was a waste of time to keep going. However, months later, the driver of the other car confessed. And not only that, but the police also found the dead bodies of many young men in the same place where Rocío had been thrown to. The driver panicked, saying that the girl had come back from the dead for revenge. And from then on, every St. Valentine's Day, Rocío reappears in that road asking for help, hoping that one of the men she attacks will be one of the men responsible for her death. They say that her red dress charms men, and when she convinces them to take off their seatbelts to give them a kiss, they lose control of their cars in that curve. And just like her, they crash and are shot out of their cars, breaking through their windshield.
Penny left work very late. Like every night, she drove her car along the deserted road back home. That day, she was very tired, and the road was long, so she decided to stop at a service station to fill up the gas tank and stretch her legs, and have a coffee while she was at it. She didn't want to fall asleep at the wheel. After a few minutes, she decided to resume her journey. But soon, she saw through the rearview mirror how a car was behind her and made signs with its lights, turning them on and off. Penny was terrified. She didn't recognize the car's license plate, so she decided to speed up. The car behind, far from giving up, increased its speed and began to intermittently put on its high beams. Penny kept speeding up. She was on a traffic road. There were no houses and no one to call for help. Suddenly, the car behind came so close that it hit her rear bumper. The young woman didn't understand anything. She didn't know if he was someone who had drunk too much and didn't know what he was doing, or if he was someone dangerous who wanted to hurt her. She kept accelerating, trying to gain an advantage with the car behind, until finally, and with her heart about to explode, she managed to enter the city roads. There was much more light there, and with the curve, she managed to leave her pursuer behind. When she managed to get home, she ran out of the car to get to the door as quickly as possible. Upon entering, she locked the door and looked out the window. She couldn't believe it. The car that was chasing her parked right behind hers. He had followed her home. A short, frightened man got out of the car and, looking out the window, yelled at her, "Don't open the door. Call the police." Penny didn't understand anything. Why was this man who had chased her telling her to call the police? Suddenly, a man in a long trench coat and carrying an axe got out of her own car. With a firm step, he lunged at the driver who was chasing her and dismembered him in a matter of seconds. Penny couldn't contain her screams of hysteria. That driver who was chasing her, the only thing he wanted was to warn the woman that there was someone in her back seat. At the gas station, he had seen how the killer had broken into the woman's car while she was buying her coffee. The next day, the police found Penny's body in her house with broken window panes. Despite all the investigations, the killer in the back seat was never identified.
"Am I going to die, doctor?" David asked me as they put him in the operation room. The boy, just 10 years old, had been crushed in a terrible car accident. The anesthetist proceeded to put him to sleep. Once we started the operation, we saw that there was hardly any chance of him resisting. Despite this, we put all our efforts into saving his life, but after half an hour, his heart stopped. My colleagues told me that his father had also died in the accident. A disgrace. I proceeded to stitch his open abdomen to take him to the morgue, and just as I put the needle through, his body trembled. I withdrew my hand, wondering what had caused that post-mortem spasm. But suddenly, the boy gasped, and as if it were a horror movie, he opened his eyes and uttered a piercing cry. I stumbled back in fright, and I quickly asked the whole team for help. Those who were leaving the room ran back in, all looking panicked at the sight of the boy they had left for dead, screaming on the operating table. The anesthetist tried to put him back into sedation. The pain he felt with his body open had to be horrible. But none of us could believe it when we saw on the monitors that his heart hadn't started beating again. He would have to be dead, but he was alive with his heart stopping. I started doing chest compressions. His ribs creaked under my hands and the anesthesia wasn't working. What is happening to me?" The boy, still conscious, stammered. None of us responded. Nobody knew what to say. We had faced many challenges in our career, but never anything like this. I took a deep breath and tried to maintain my composure. "You had an accident, David." The anesthetist grabbed my shoulder and whispered in my ear that we should isolate the operating room, that this could be contagious. While they called security from the prep room, the kid kept asking me questions. He asked me about his father. I couldn't lie to him. I had to tell him that he had died. Then he started sobbing and asked me if he was dying too. A river of tears fell down my face. I shook his hand and told him, "You are not alone. I will stay with you until the end." The Center for Disease Control had been alerted to our situation. There was nothing we could do but hope and pray that it wasn't contagious. The boy was in a lot of pain, and I could only keep him distracted. Hours later, the prevention team arrived, fully equipped in their suits. They had evacuated another room for all the doctors that were there, but I decided to stay where the little one was. No one should have to suffer alone, especially with all those people doing hundreds of tests. "Doctor, I can't see," David yelled. I examined his pupils and found that they didn't respond. "I'm very afraid." I stayed by his side. I told him that everything was fine, but each time he yelled at me more as if he didn't hear me. Within minutes, he lost his hearing. He had gone deaf and blind. I could no longer communicate with him. I wanted to comfort him, tell him that I would stay with him, not to be afraid. I could not stop crying. The prevention agents decided that my presence had become unnecessary. David wouldn't stop crying. No, I promised that I would stay with them. Suddenly, the little boy stopped screaming. Did he die? I demanded that they inform me of their condition, and they told me that the only organ that was still active was the brain. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't hear, but he was still in excruciating pain. They covered him with an airtight capsule, and I never saw him again. When my quarantine ended, I contacted a friend who worked on the prevention team and had no record of David's case. Days later, a lawyer and a doctor showed up at my house. They told me what I had been infected with, and I had to sign a confidentiality document. They gave me an injection, but it wasn't a cure. It would only prevent me from spreading that disease. My end will be just like that of little David. I just hope someone sticks with me when it happens.
Laura was a girl with a very normal life. She got good grades at school, she respected her parents, and she had many friends. However, her attitude and sweet character changed the day her parents gave her the great news that she was going to have a little sister. At first, she was not aware of the great change her life would undergo. She thought it might even be fun to have someone to play with. But when the girl was born and all the attention of her family fell on her, Laura became very jealous. When her sister turned 2, they put one more bed in Laura's room. In addition to sharing toys, she also had to share her room. The little girl always grabbed her things, which made her piss off. She broke the toys that she had lovingly cared for years. And her parents didn't care when her little sister had that behavior. They justified everything by saying that she was very little. The days passed and Laura felt more and more anger for her sister to the point of saying that she hated her. When her parents heard her say those words, they punished her and forbade her from playing with her friends for a week. They told her that she now had the task of behaving like a good older sister. She didn't understand why she should behave well with that girl who, since she had arrived at her house, had destroyed her life. Everything kept getting worse. The complaints, scolding for everything. Laura no longer knew how to show her parents that this girl wasn't as good as they believed. That this girl was the devil. She felt more and more sad. Nobody believed her. Until one day, she decided to put her parents' phone to record in her room. She hid it near a stuffed animal so the girl wouldn't know that she was going to be recorded. Later, her mother came into the room with her little sister and left her there to play together. When her mother left, Laura closed the door and tried to piss off her little sister. She took her toys from her and told her, "It's time to end this whole thing." It was either one or the other, but they couldn't both stay there. At that moment, as if possessed, the little girl stretched out and speaking with a demonic voice provoked Laura. Laura got scared and wanted to leave the room, but the baby prevented her. She grabbed her head and smashed her skull into the floor. She kept hitting her head, flooding the entire floor with blood. Even the tiles seemed to crack from the strength and anxiety that this baby had. Laura's parents never found out what happened to their daughter. Her disappearance has been declared for years. Neighbors believe that jealousy made her leave home and that she probably would have starved to death. To this day, Laura's parents continue to take care of the tender baby who has dazzled them since the day she was born. Mary was mentally reviewing the presentation she had to give the next day at the university. The court would be composed of several professors and owners of very important companies. Everything had to be perfect. Apart from the grade, a possible contract with some of those businessmen was also at stake. She opened the closet and laid out her clothes, a suit of pants and jacket and a white shirt. That basic never failed. She looked between her shoes and she had some beautiful black sandals still unworn. It was the missing accessory to complete an impeccable look. But looking at her feet, she realized that she had long nails, so she took a nail clipper and carefully cut them. At that moment, she heard her grandmother's voice in her head saying, "Mary, never cut your nails at night." The young woman stared into space. Her grandmother had always believed in various superstitions, and since she was a child, she had always paid attention to her. But with the pressure and nerves of the presentation, she had completely forgotten. She sighed, looking at the wall. What if everything went wrong because she cut her toenails at night? She tried to remember and remembered her grandmother's words. She had told her that if she cut her nails after 8:30 in the evening, the instrument with which she had cut them would be cursed. It would be sharper and brighter and would bring with it something terrifying. Afterwards, someone would knock on the door and leave a box for her. It couldn't be opened until dawn. She shouldn't be curious. The owner of the box would try to surprise her, so if she felt any presence, she must not look back. If she didn't expect death, she shouldn't cut her nails at night. Suddenly, Mary looked at the nail bits on the floor and her heart began to pound. Panic seized her. Her grandmother was always right. She was so scared that she decided to call her mother, but a noise paralyzed her. Someone was ringing the doorbell. Her cell phone slipped from her hands, falling to the ground. There was no way the legend her grandmother had told her was true. But she wasn't expecting visitors, so who was calling her? Her hands began to sweat, but she steeled herself and headed to the door. Maybe her grandmother's story was a lie and she was just exaggerating. As she walked towards the entrance, the doorbell rang 3 times and then stopped. Mary closed her eyes and opened the door. Nobody was there, but there was a box on the floor. She remembered her grandmother's words again, that someone would leave a box, but she shouldn't be curious and wait until dawn to open it. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her head. She began to cry desperately. She just wanted to close her eyes and think that none of this was happening. She wanted to wake up from that nightmare. The box was black. She couldn't open it. She wanted to, but she couldn't. She thought of her friends, who were very pranksters. Maybe they wanted to give her a hard time and then laugh together and work off the stress of the presentation. She went upstairs to the bathroom to wet her face, and suddenly she felt as if someone was on the other side of the door. She remembered again her grandmother's words, that she should not look back if she noticed something or someone approaching, that the owner of the box would surprise her. But who was the owner of the box? And what did he want from her? She looked determinedly at herself in the mirror and thought she couldn't die. Not tonight. She had to escape. So with all the courage she could, she closed her eyes and left the bathroom. She ran down the stairs, screaming in horror, feeling someone following her, but her legs gave out and she tumbled down the steps. She got up as she could with much pain and ran towards the exit. Just as she was about to leave, she tripped over the black box, which she had left by the front door. She turned her head and watched as the box with a punch had flipped open. She leaned out to see what was there and quickly threw her hands to her mouth in panic. There were mutilated and bloody toes and nails. She gave a terrified scream, and when she looked down, she saw that all her toes were missing. The last thing she saw was a face as white as paper and eyes redder than blood. Do not cut your nails at night if you don't expect death.
Brian was only 6 years old when he was hospitalized for a problem with his little heart. It was very sad to walk through the corridor where several children, instead of being able to play in the park, were locked up between 4 walls connected to various machines in order to continue breathing. The sanitarians went out of their way to make them happy every day, so the head nurse Alan had an idea. He encouraged his coworkers to dress up as clowns, complete with colorful costumes, wigs, and makeup. In this way, through laughter therapy, they would help all the children in the hospital. In the afternoon, the nurses got dressed and went into different rooms to make the little ones laugh. The head nurse got Brian's room. When the boy heard the sound of the door opening, he jumped out of bed thinking it was his parents. However, when he found himself face to face with the clown, fear seized him, screaming desperately. Alan, wanting to calm the little boy down, approached him and tried to explain that it was just a costume, that he shouldn't be afraid. But the boy was so horrified that he ran to the window, tearing the intravenous line out of his arm with the movement. The head nurse threw himself at him with all his might to go grab him, but the boy, feeling attacked, threw himself out the window, emitting one last deafening scream. The fall from the 5th floor had been deadly. The screams and noises had been heard from everywhere. When other nurses entered the room, they found Alan frozen, staring out the window, and the child's slippers next to the window. The nurse didn't sleep that night, nor would he sleep the following nights. In his mind, he relived the tragic event over and over again. The next day, the news was in all the newspapers in the city, in which he was blamed for the death of little Brian. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the most unrecognizable body of the boy when he was picked up. Weeks later, the nurse on his floor, dressed up as a clown again. Afterwards, he grabbed a bottle and threw it against the wall, breaking it into several pieces. With one of the crystals, a finger was cut, and with the blood that dripped from his hand, he wrote a text on the wall that said, "I killed the boy, and also the clown." Then he jumped out the window of his 5th floor.
Jenny was a 13-year-old girl. She was very excited because for the first time the circus had come to her town. She had never visited one, so she tried in every way possible to convince her parents to take her. Her family was humble and she didn't have enough savings to pay for 3 tickets. But Jenny was so excited that she used the money she had saved from her birthdays to pay half the price, and the other half her parents would put up to make her happy. That day in the morning, she was so happy that she told the news to all her classmates. Many told her that they would meet there because their parents would also take them. However, one of her best friends, Tom, pouted and told her that he had to talk to her alone. The young man had heard horrible rumors about that circus in nearby towns. Jenny thought he was just jealous that she could go and he couldn't, but she asked what those rumors were about. Tom told her that in the back of the circus, the actors kidnapped children and did horrible things to them. Jenny frowned. She didn't believe anything. When she asked what kind of things it was, the boy told her that he didn't know anything else, only that it was a very dangerous place. Jenny angrily accused him of trying to scare her. The boy, annoyed by her reaction, turned around and left without saying another word. Jenny wasn't going to let her friend spoil her happiness for the day, so when it was time to get out of school, she ran home to get ready for the circus show. The tent was installed in the village forest. Jenny arrived with her parents half an hour before the show, but there was already a long line of people at the box office buying their tickets. While her parents waited for their turn, the young woman approached the side of the tent where she saw several actors pass by who were practicing part of the show. Very excited, she couldn't help herself and went after them. One of the artists realized that the girl was following them, and when his companions were confused, he backed away and approached her stealthily. He told her to get away from there. That was a dangerous place. The actor asked her to return to her parents' side and ran back to his companions. Jenny remembered what her friend Tom had told her at school, so she decided to go back to the entrance. However, when she was walking back, one of the actors got in her way. He asked her where she was going and if she wanted to see some of the animals they kept in their cages. The young woman looked at him with wide eyes and excitedly replied that she would love to see the lion and tiger up close. The actor shook her hand and invited her to enter the tent. Jenny felt that what she was doing was wrong. If her parents didn't find her, they would be distraught. She asked the artist to let her out, but he gripped her hand tighter. The young woman could perceive a rotten smell. In that place, there were many cages, but no animals. She approached one of them and she could see that they were full of human corpses. She started to run towards the exit, but an acrobat with a macabre smile stopped her, tying her up and covering her eyes with a white band. Right after, shouts were heard inside the tent, and the public that was outside in line began to applaud, believing that it was part of the show to create expectation of what they were going to find there. The acrobat put his lips to Jenny's ears and said in a raspy voice, "This is the place that will make you belong to the circus forever. Deformed diva."
Fran, Oscar, Carlos, and Antonio shared the same passion, the viral challenges that circulated on the internet. They had proven their bravery in a wide range of challenges, from the most popular to the most obscure and little known. They already had a great experience, and they demonstrated it on their YouTube channel. Although they hadn't gained a large number of followers, they didn't care. Fame and money were not their motivation. They simply enjoyed the entertainment that the challenges provided. They really wanted to face a new, extremely extreme one, something that would test their limits. So after exhaustively researching, they found one called the Crow Challenge. It was said that the winner would experience a full life if all went well, although the most likely option was failure and could end the player's own life. Oscar, the most skeptical, initially opposed it, considering it meaningless. On the other hand, Antonio wasn't entirely in favor, although his objections came from a completely opposite perspective. He had quite a bit of respect for it. However, Fran and Carlos managed to convince them. The challenge could be done alone or in a group. To begin with, they had to meet in a dark environment, and if there were several participants, position themselves in such a way that everyone could see each other. After making the intro to a video for their channel, they headed to Fran's room. Once there, they closed the door and lowered the blinds, creating the perfect atmosphere. The first phase required reciting in Latin. Black crow, fix your gaze on us, the wings are about to unfold. So the four friends, arranged in a circle, intoned the words. Next, they waited for at least 6 minutes, the stipulated time for the crows to arrive from the underworld, according to the instructions. The challenge has begun, the page announced. Now, each of you is under the gaze of a crow from the abyss, although it hasn't yet arrived. This is your last chance to turn around. However, if you do, you must be aware that one of the crows will be watching you for life. Do you want to leave? Oscar said, mocking Antonio. Leave it now, Fran scolded him. Before moving on to the next phase, a prayer was required to be recited, also in Latin. The first part said, "First door, door of fear, open." The four of them came together and said the Latin words in unison. Then they went to the bathroom, each one with a lit candle, and stood in front of the mirror. The challenge instructions continued. The candle will act as a guide to attract a crow to our world. The process will take 3 minutes. However, the abyss is a place of deep darkness. If the candle is not extinguished at that moment, the crow will be dazzled and his eyes will burn. For this reason, the crow will only come if the following prayer is recited in Latin. All-seeing crow, may this light illuminate your path to our world, and I promise by my eyes that I will not hurt yours. The four friends said the entire prayer at the same time in front of the mirror. To ensure they met the exact time, they set the stopwatch on their mobile phones that would tell them when to blow out the candle. The 3rd minute arrived. Fran, Carlos, and Antonio extinguished the candle instantly. However, Oscar didn't do so. He blew, but it wasn't enough and the candle was lit again. Surprised, he blew again, and then he managed to put it out. Antonio looked at him with concern. Oscar noticed his friend's face and assured him in a firm voice, without betraying any hint of fear, that nothing was going to happen to him. They continued with the next step, in which they had to play a melody with an ocarina, or, failing that, a flute. However, whoever chose to play the melody with the flute had to know that their margin of error was 0. With the ocarina, on the other hand, they could have up to 3 errors. They opted for the flute because Fran had one collecting dust in an old drawer. One was enough, since it was not necessary for everyone to play at the same time. Fran read the instructions aloud. Now that the crow is in your world, you must get it to follow you. To achieve this, you must play a melody with the crow's favorite instrument, the ocarina. The crow will only accept 3 errors. A flute can also be used, but the crow doesn't enjoy it as much, so there can be no mistakes. You will only listen once the second opening sentence is done, so it can be practiced. However, the crow's patience is not infinite. It will only wait 3 days. If done in a group, each person must play separately, and the prayer must also be individual. Any melody that consists of exactly 10 notes, all of them low, is accepted. The 4 practiced their respective melodies, and the next day they met in Fran's yard. The prayer, which was to be pronounced in Latin, was: Second gate, gate of dedication, open. Crow that hears everything,
May this melody serve to gain your trust. I offer my ears as a guarantee. Carlos was the first, recited the prayer in Latin, and began to play. He did it without making mistakes. The same thing happened with Fran and Oscar. Then it was Antonio's turn. He looked nervous. He said the prayer and began to play the melody. However, around the 7th note, he went out of tune. His expression after finishing reflected even greater concern. Fran and Oscar noticed his nervousness and quickly encouraged him with reassuring words, assuring him that it was just a game and that nothing was going to happen to him, that all of that was nonsense that people made up. However, his tranquility didn't last long. A day later, they decided to continue with the recordings and the challenge. Antonio arrived very nervous, saying that they should stop with that challenge. He felt like he was starting to lose his hearing. Oscar reacted as always, with ridicule and telling him that this was just his subconscious. But Antonio was convinced that he was right. No, Oscar, it is not my subconscious. Do you remember that you also told me that yesterday you started to see blurry? His friend started laughing out loud and argued that he had spent many hours editing in front of the computer. He told him that he was hallucinating and that he had taken that challenge seriously. Even so, Antonio tried to convince his friends to stop and not continue with that dangerous challenge. Since everyone seemed to ignore him, in a fit of hysteria, he took his cell phone out of his pocket and decided to delete the YouTube channel. The young people threw up their hands. All the material they had created over the years had disappeared. Antonio didn't show regret. He felt that he had to do it so that his friends would have no reason to end that challenge. But Fran tried to reassure the group with his words. I never did this for you two. I did it to hang out with my friends. The crow challenge is just for that, having an entertaining moment. Nothing bad's gonna happen. Furthermore, even if it were true, we have already started it. And it is assumed that if we abandon it, we will lose and the consequences could be fatal. So let's continue having fun as always. His speech seemed to convince them all. At this time, it was already the 3rd day, so they continued right there, although the situation was becoming quite complicated. They read the instructions aloud so they could continue. Now a crow is interested in you. However, he still doesn't fully trust. To achieve that, you must cook a dish and leave it ready in a place where you can see the moon. You must prepare a dish for each member of the group. Crows eat raw food, so no cooking is necessary. You just have to put the ingredients together. The opening prayer should be performed before cooking, and the other when placing the plate in the place where the crow will dine. Both prayers should be said in a round if you're in a group. The ingredients are the wing of a bird, a chicken wing will suffice, a fruit, a few drops of human blood, and a corpse, whether of an animal or human, but it must be whole. They had no problems with the first 3 ingredients. The difficulty lay in the last one. Frank grabbed a bird his dog had caught. Oscar ran to the road and found a toad that had been run over. Antonio used one of the fish his father had caught the day before. Carlos, however, failed to achieve anything. It looks like I'm going to be the only one to overcome this challenge, commented Fran. The opening prayer read, 3rd gate, gate of pleasure, open. They placed all the ingredients on a plate each and went up to the roof of Fran's house. They didn't have time to look for a better place, and they continued with the words, Crow that tests and judges everything, let this dish be the necessary proof on me. I swear by my stomach that it will please you. They slept together, and during the night, Fran got up while his friends continued sleeping. He went up to the roof. Despite his speech, he still doubted if all that was true. Since he was the only one who hadn't failed, he didn't care if it was real or not. He preferred his friends to continue believing that everything was a fable. When he arrived, he saw the empty plates. It could have been a cat that had raided them, but he just took them down and washed them. He would say he couldn't wait because he needed the dishes cleaned as soon as possible. They reached the next step. It was the most peculiar. They had to get a mannequin, put a wig on it, and a black dress or suit. Once with clothes, they had to take him to an abandoned building or under construction. So they created a small mannequin with a black dress and blonde wig. They took him to an abandoned hospital and left him in one of the rooms of the second floor. Before leaving, they said in Latin, "Fourth gate, gate of meeting, open." And they read the rest of the instructions. Once you have located the figure, you must leave and return at least the next day and at most 3 days later. However, you should not go alone. Each one must have a companion. The gender and age of the person accompanying you doesn't matter. All of you together must remove the mannequin and spend the night in the same place. At this stage, the crows don't allow separation. If the crow is interested, it may choose your companion for you. The friends stare at each other in surprise. Who could ask for something so peculiar? Who would accept such a proposal? They spent 2 days thinking about it, and it seemed like they wouldn't find anyone willing. However, on the second day, during his literature class, his homework assignment was to write a horror story. Fran wrote about ghosts. Carlos shared one of his most recent nightmares. Antonio developed a story about monsters, while Oscar chose to capture the steps of the Crow's Challenge. On the third day, they found their companions. 4 literature professors were attracted to Oscar's imagination. Although they were disappointed to learn that he had taken it from the internet, the teachers were interested in the challenge and decided to offer their help. That same night, the 8 headed to the abandoned hospital. Upon arrival, they discovered that the entrance to the room where the mannequin was located was blocked due to a collapse. The young people became discouraged, but the teacher suggested entering through the window. It was risky. One had to reach the window of the room adjacent to the mannequin from outside, while another held him in his arms. Fran volunteered to venture out the window. After all, risk was part of what they were looking for in that game. One of the teachers supported him as he snuck inside. The plan was carried out successfully, and the 8 returned safely with the mannequin. They spent the night together at Fran's house. Both the parents and the sister weren't at home. They had been away for 10 days. Fran slept on the couch, his friends in his room and his sisters, and the teachers in the guest rooms. Fran woke up at 10 in the morning. He looked out the window and saw the 4 teachers. They were staring at the house. "Are you okay? Where are the boys?" the young man asked, but they took a while to respond. One of the teachers answered that they were still sleeping, but something was smelling strange to Fran. He ran towards his room. He didn't find anyone. He looked in his sister's room. Nobody. In his parents'. Neither. Not even in the guest room. If it had been any other time, he might have thought it was a bad joke, but not. Not after seeing that all the plates, except Carlos, were empty. That challenge had stopped seeming harmless to him, so he decided to lock all the doors. The teachers slowly approached the window. Fran lowered the blind in their faces while they hid it. The challenge of the crow. That was all the fault of that damn challenge. The only way to survive was to complete it. So he grabbed the mannequin and decided to go to the garage. There, he would have more time to think. When he passed through the garden, what he saw chilled him. There were 4 crosses, and on 3 of them lay the lifeless bodies of his friends. "You heard his eyes, now he will take yours," it said, carved under the body of Oscar, whose eyes were missing. "You heard his ears, now he will take yours," was written under the corpse of Antonio, whose ears had been removed. "You heard his stomach, now he will take yours," appeared on the Carlos' gutted body. They all shared 2 terrifying characteristics, in addition to their chilling fate. A deep cut on their chest and a drawing of a crow carved into their right arms. Then he remembered the last 3 steps. Cut off his right arm in the shape of a crow and upload a photo of that bird in a public place and publish it on a social network. He locked the garage door, placed the mannequin, and began to recite in Latin, "Last gate, gate of the end, open. May all my sacrifices have been sufficient to be to your liking. And if they aren't, have a representative of yours take my life as an eternal apology, because I don't deserve to see you in person." The zipper on the mannequin's dress began to unzip. Suddenly, a blonde girl emerged from the mannequin wearing a black dress, the same as the mannequin, but with feathers. It was clear that she was a representative and his death was inevitable. But she's just a girl. However, a crow emerged from the girl's face, his beak stuck into the young man's leg, and then disappeared. The girl dodged a kick, threw him to the ground, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Fran's hand into the ground. She repeated the same action with the other. With a third knife, she carved a crow into the young man's right arm. Then she grabbed his cell phone and walked away. It was useless to try to free himself. The knives were stuck deep, but Fran didn't want to die. He struggled with the severed hands and managed to get up. His hands were divided almost in half. The pain was unbearable, but he still managed to kick the phone out of the girl's hand. He thought that if he destroyed the phone, the girl wouldn't be able to post the image and perhaps he could be saved. He ran to where his cell phone was, about to step on it and break it. But one of the literature teachers broke the window, grabbed him by the neck, and took him outside. The 4 teachers immobilized him, and he could do nothing but watch as the girl grabbed his cell phone and posted the image. Then she approached him with a knife in her hand. 4 crows came from the void upon hearing the call, said the girl. But they met 4 young men who took it as a joke. Maybe you didn't fail any of the tests, but like the other 3, you failed to give your heart to the crow. Now, it will take yours.
How are you, horror lovers? Today we tell you the legend of Aurora Simons, an American woman who at the age of 30 became pregnant. At first she couldn't contain her joy. She was very excited to know that she would soon be a mother. However, a few weeks later she began to feel unwell and weak. She thought that it was normal, because the first months of the trimester could cause quite a bit of discomfort. But soon the situation became totally horrifying. It cost her a lot to confess it to her family, but she had no other option than to reveal that her baby was tormenting her. She claimed that the fetus spoke to her, caused her severe pain, and that she had threatened to take her life if she mentioned his existence. The family tried to reassure her by telling her that they were just imagining, the result of stress, exhaustion, and fear. The best thing she could do was stay calm, be relaxed, and wait for the months to pass, because each time the discomfort would get less. Aurora reproached them for no one believing her. Every day she was more scared and desperate. She was screaming for help, to get that baby out of her, that he was causing her unbearable pain. After speaking with psychologists who diagnosed that her mind was playing tricks on her, the woman continued to affirm that she felt that she was dying, because this pain wasn't normal. So her family decided to take her to a hospital to check and see if the child was okay. Unfortunately, Aurora lost her life on the way, a little before reaching the center. Doctors tried to revive her, but both she and the baby had died. After several tests, they discovered that all of Aurora's organs were chewed up, as if a rat was gnawing each of them to pieces. That woman had spent weeks imploring them to remove that devil from her insides, which consumed her, threatened her, and tortured her. The doctors refused to believe all those statements, but they found no explanation for the supernatural event.
It was the year 1996, and the television commercials showed the recent Nintendo 64 with its flagship game, Mario 64. Bob, 35 years old, was a lover of video game consoles. It was his passion since he was a child. He couldn't wait to get his hands on the new release, even though the console hadn't even gone on sale in stores yet. However, this night could be very special. In his city, a television program had organized an event in which a Nintendo 64 with the Mario game would be raffled. It was one of the few consoles that the company had distributed to various sectors to create expectation for future customers. Bob had registered online and had managed to participate in the event. He arrived at the chain's facilities 2 hours early, and he wasn't the only one, because there was a large group of children and teenagers at the door. During the wait, he felt somewhat irritated and indignant at the reaction of the other participants. Almost everyone looked at him as if they were facing an alien. "Aren't you too old for this?" a boy of 15 or 16 dared to say to him. "At your age, I would already have children and a wife," he heard another whisper behind his back. Bob just bit his tongue so as not to risk being expelled before entering.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you were waiting for has finally arrived, said the presenter opening his program. After which, a contest began in which the ability and knowledge that the participants had in relation to various games were tested. Finally, after a tough competition, there were 5 finalists, among whom was Bob and the daughter of the show's producer. A girl of about 14, red-headed and chubby, with big horn-rimmed glasses. Bob didn't know who her father was, that he had rigged almost everything for her to win. In the last part of the contest, there were 5 sections and the participants had to choose one at random. Behind each block, there was always a prize. And that's when Bob noticed that the presenter always showed a number from 1 to 5 with his right hand to the red-haired girl. She was doing it downwards and his movements seemed somewhat spontaneous, but it hadn't gone unnoticed by Bob, who realized that he was telling the girl what theme to choose. When the girl won, Bob lost control and said everything he saw out loud. The audience was silent looking at him, but they all laughed out loud when the presenter told him in a fake joking tone. Come on, man, it's just a game. You will have the opportunity to buy your own console later. I'm sure you can buy it yourself and you won't have to ask your parents for it. Bob got even angrier with those words, so the presenter approached him, turning his back to the audience and covering his microphone, said, Hey, I think you're right. You deserved that console, but I have another one. Don't worry. I just have to ask them to bring it to me, so wait for me outside and I'll bring it to you. Patiently, Bob waited in the street until 11:30 p.m. It was already very late and he saw that they were closing all the facilities. So he approached the gate guard and told him what happened on the show. The man told him he was sorry, but he could not let him in. Just at that moment, the presenter with other guards passed by the side of the door. Bob shouted at him from the door, claiming the promised prize. However, he sneered at him and said that he was impressed that he had fallen for such a simple lie and trap. Bob realized that the presenter had only told him this to keep him off the set and avoid a scandal on air. He lost control and began to insult him, but the presenter ordered his guards to take him away from there and threatened him with a severe beating if he dared to appear there again. For a long time, no one ever heard from Bob again until they hosted a costume contest on the same show. Taking advantage of the occasion to remind the presenter what made him suffer the night of the contest, Bob dressed up as Mario. However, his suit was torn and covered in blood and dirt. He had also painted his face, simulating bruises and wounds. During the program, at a time when the presenter was speaking, Bob stood behind him, putting him in a very uncomfortable situation. Since the show was broadcasted live, the presenter pretended to be in a good mood and said, Look, our friend Mario seems to be very excited about our costume contest. Let's see, Mr. Plumber, tell us what encourages you to get in front of the cameras tonight. Bob was silent for a few seconds, causing the presenter more discomfort, and then, in a soft voice, he said, Tonight, I'm going to kill you and your family. In that instant, he recognized the man's voice and goosebumps rose. The presenter was going to use the humorous tone, as he always did, to make the audience laugh at Bob's words. But suddenly, all the lights inexplicably went out for 10 seconds, and when everything lit up again, Bob was no longer there. Frightened by the threats, the presenter asked some guards to go to his house to check that his family was okay. Arriving home, he greeted his daughter with a kiss on the forehead. The young woman who had seen the program was worried, but her father assured her that no one would harm her. He had hired a couple of chained guards to watch the house that night. A couple of hours after he fell asleep, the presenter woke up agitated when he heard a loud noise. When he entered the room, he couldn't believe it. The furniture and the television were smashed, the guards were dead, and on the wall was written in blood in large letters, "It's me, Mario." Those were the words that the character said in the Mario 64 game. The man rubbed his eyes, trying to believe that it was all a dream, but everything was the same.
Face pale, he ran back to his room. In his bed was the head of his wife and the body was on the floor. The presenter was crying and screaming on his knees with his face in his hands. Unfortunately, the worst part of the nightmare was yet to come. "Dad!" his daughter yelled. The man ran to the girl's room and found her dying on the floor with her chest open and the Nintendo 64 embedded. Next to her was Bob in his bloody Mario costume carrying a huge dagger. In those moments, terror outweighed anger and the presenter ran. People say that Bob chased him into a ravine and that the presenter fell there, breaking his leg and finally being killed by his pursuer. The last that was heard of Bob was that the police entered his house and found a Nintendo 64 turned on, and a Mario that inexplicably returned to die on the screen over and over again with a background melody. Mary and George had waited 9 long months to meet their twins. However, a complication in childbirth caused one of the little ones to be born dead. It was a hard blow for them. They had always dreamt of having 2 children. But after the operation that they had done to the mother, the doctors confirmed that she wouldn't be able to get pregnant again. They were immensely happy to be parents, but the memory of having lost their little girl tormented them. So they made a decision. They chose to manage all the necessary documentation to adopt an orphan child and be able to share all their love with a little one who needed it. Luckily, they didn't have to wait too long, and they soon received a call confirming that they had been selected. When they arrived at the orphanage, the director herself introduced them to the little ones. Their ages were between 9 and 10 years old. However, Mary turned her attention to the only girl who hadn't been introduced. She was bucked up in a corner, hugging a rag doll. All the children were clean and they looked good. It was obvious that they were cared for in the center. However, that girl was dirty and had several wounds. This caused the woman a lot of uncertainty, and she asked the director what the reason was. The person in charge tried to divert the couple's attention to the other children, indicating that this minor was something special. She told them that her name was Valerie. Since she had arrived, she hadn't spoken or played with the other children. And no matter how much they cleaned her every day, she always reappeared with a dirty body. The director continued with her presentation. However, Mary felt very sorry for Valerie. She was sure that the only thing she needed was love. She discussed it with her husband, and he also agreed. So a few days later, the adoption was processed and Valerie became their adoptive daughter. When the little girl had been in her new home for a week, Mary began to notice that very strange things were happening. She washed her every day, and after a few hours, she was dirty again, just as the director of the center had told them. They spoke to her, but she didn't answer and she hardly wanted to eat. One day, Mary wanted to grab a rug from the drawer when she saw that it was empty. She approached Valerie and saw that the little girl was busy creating rag dolls. Instead of scolding her for grabbing them without permission, she let her play because the girl was finally enjoying herself. When she saw them closely, she realized that they were a replica of the director and the children of the center. She had crafted them with great skills. A few hours later, she saw that something was igniting in the fireplace. Valerie was in front, watching with a smile how her new dolls were burned. The mother didn't know what to think. Perhaps the girl missed her peers. So she decided to show up at the center to talk to the director. When she arrived, she couldn't believe it. The building was on fire. Firefighters were trying to put out the fire. A shiver ran through her body and Mary hurried back home. When she arrived, she searched everywhere for the girl, but her only trace was in the garden. A new doll lay on the floor and it looked like her husband. Its head was cut off. A few minutes later, she heard a piercing scream. Mary looked towards the house and could see how her husband's head fell through the window and was crushed on the floor. Valerie was standing in front of her, smiling with satisfaction. The woman pounced on the girl and with a stone began to hit her hard, screaming. She was disfiguring her face until she gave her last breath. Afterwards, she buried her in the garden and returned home to grab her son and escape from there. When she got inside, she found the little boy sitting in a puddle of water next to the light socket, a plug in his hand. In the other, he had 2 rag dolls. They were the replica of the mother and her son. Mary tried to stop her baby from using the cable, but it was impossible. Both met their death there. A few hours later, in the dead of night, the earth in the garden began to move, and the girl, injured and dirty looking, got up and began to walk.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life horror videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode.